And I think we need to reimagine in our churches even the way we think about local impact in Atlanta. It's not, don't just focus on the people in Buckhead. And there's people struggling in all places. But
Yes.
we are missing the forest for the trees.
There's a lot in education in Atlanta that is broken. I really do believe that the model that AYA uses, and there are a few other schools around that are in the Atlanta metro area that are somewhat similar. Nobody's doing it exactly the same because there are a couple that don't have the faith component. There are just a couple of different models, but really the focus at AYA is really on how far can we get these children to go.
Hey there, welcome to the Simple Charity Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Grasso. Thank you for being a part of our listener community as we grow together and learn to love generously like Jesus. On this episode, I interview Erin Conrad, who serves on the development team of Edify International, and she's based in Atlanta, Georgia, which is also where I am. I've admired the work of Edify for years as they utilize a network of microfinance institutions, or MFIs, to offer capital as well as training and technology to Christian private schools in developing countries around the world. And on today's episode, we talk about Erin's personal story and how she used to work for Atlanta Youth Academy to provide Christ-centered education in underserved communities in Atlanta. And now she is advancing access to education globally. We talk about the value of education, and I truly believe that improving access to education is one of the best ways to love our neighbors as ourselves. I hope you join me for an educational conversation on education, and you'll learn about serving in Atlanta as well as around the world. This is your podcast, so as always, send me your thoughts, your questions, any suggestions on what we should talk about. My email is brian@simplecharity.org, and I am so glad you're with us today.
Hi, my name is Melissa, and I serve as a Simple Charity philanthropic advisor to individuals, couples, families, foundations, and family offices in the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area of North Carolina, but also to clients around the country. If you're curious about your own generosity journey and would like help thinking through a philanthropic strategy with intentionality to discern where God is calling you to love people, to find excellent nonprofits to partner with, or to understand the impact of your current grant making, I would love to connect and share more about Simple Charity's philanthropic advising offerings. You can connect with me at melissahall@simplecharity.org. That's melissahall@simplecharity.org. And you can learn more about us at simplecharity.org. That's simplecharity.org.
Well, hi, Erin. It is so good to be with you today. My guest on the show today is Erin Conrad, who is the Director of Edification and Philanthropy for Edify, a role that she's been in since 2023. And before that, she was the Director of Development for Atlanta Youth Academy. And Erin, I'd love to start every episode by asking, what are you grateful for today?
Hey, Brian, I am honored to be with you. I go through a gratefulness exercise almost every day, and I am grateful for the hope of the gospel, and I'm grateful to be called to be part of what God's doing in the world, and I'm also grateful for my health and my family.
Three things. That's great. How's your family? Tell us a little about your family.
So I am a mother of 5. I have 3 sons. I have 3 daughters and 2 sons who range in age from 34 to 26. I also have 3 stepchildren who happen to be triplets who are 29. They are all
triplets.
Yes, yes.
Holy cow.
And two of mine are twins. So my
Oh
husband and I
my
have a
gosh.
blended, yeah, my husband and I have a blended family. It's a crazy total of eight children. And yes, his three are triplets, and two of mine are identical twins.
Mm.
So it's kind of a crazy household to be a part of, but we have a lot of fun.
That's awesome. I come from a blended family, so I have five step siblings and a half brother. And then three siblings. So there's 10 of us total. So we get the craziness, but it's so much fun. Like, I think my wife is from a blended family, and there's 8 of them total. So I got 10, she's got 8. And so we joke, like, when we're talking about how many kids we're going to have, we're like, oh, not too many, maybe 4 or 5. And our friends all think we're crazy.
Well, yeah, I mean, to have that many, I mean, people were very, as I was having kids, when I would say I have 5, they would like, their jaw would inevitably drop. Um, and, it was, 5 was God's idea. It wasn't my idea. 4 was my idea, and he gave me a little extra bonus package on the last pregnancy, which was a little startling,
Mm.
given that I had an 8-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 4-year-old,
Wow.
and then all of a sudden was going, to have 2 more. So it was definitely a very sneaky way for him to keep me on my knees and in utter, and I mean utter dependence on him every day.
Mm. A lesson that I am sure is applicable now to your role as a fundraiser, which is, in my opinion, one of those jobs that just requires that constant dependence on the Lord and trust for Him to provide. And, the funding model of an organization is the generosity of God's people, and of people who don't know God, too, at times. And it is a great trust exercise. And you got started in a fundraising role with a Christian organization, a school, and a low-income community in Atlanta called Atlanta Youth Academy. Was that your first fundraising job? Development, fundraising? There's all these euphemisms for the profession.
Right. Actually, no. I was in the development and fundraising world before I had children, back in my late 20s. And I was not a believer at the time, and I was working for the opera company here in Atlanta. I was the development director. I was very young. I had no idea what I was doing, but I just knew I was relational, and it was a relational role, and they hired a consultant to train me, which was a huge blessing. And so I was in that, arts space until my second child was born, and then they were very close together, and it was a lot of work. And so I retired and became a full-time mom for about 20 years. And then I sadly had to go through a really awful divorce, and I had to kind of start stepping back into the working world. My very first position was with Young Life Africa. I was actually just administratively helping someone here in Atlanta who worked in a division of Young Life that was called Expeditions, where they would coordinate groups to go and serve alongside the international staff. And this particular role was in Africa. I had actually been to Africa with Young Life in 2000.
Where in Africa?
I was in Tanzania and South Africa in 2008. And so the people or the guy that I was helping with Young Life Africa was actually who coordinated that trip. So I just kind of began getting my foot back in the door. And it was very cool because I had been really, really touched. My heart was really touched when I was in Africa, by the people and how incredibly spiritually rich they were in spite of their material poverty. And you can tell, Brian, knowing a little bit of my story, where this kind of goes. But so I did that for a couple of years, and then I really needed a full-time position. And
that was like the chapter 1 that led to Edify.
Yes. Ultimately, that brought me around to Edify, which is very sweet of the Lord, and is why I feel very, very called in that current position. And so from the Young Life job, I was asked to come join the staff at Atlanta Youth Academy. It was just a one-person development office at the time. I went to work for the guy who's head of school now, and he was a development guy. He was not on the education side, and so he was the perfect person for me to work with to help me dust the cobwebs out of my brain of fundraising and development. And Atlanta Youth Academy was known to me. The kids from that school would come to the Vacation Bible School at my church where I was attending at the time, and I always loved to teach Vacation Bible School, and the AYA kids were my favorite kids that were in my class. So it was very cool. I felt like when this job dropped in my lap, it was kind of the perfect amalgamation of everything that was really important to me. I was touched by Africa. I really, really wanted to work in a faith-based environment and serve those in underserved communities. And so it was a beautiful, I would love to say answer to prayer, but I don't even know I was really praying for that specifically, but it was a wonderful gift that the Lord gave me to be able to work there. And I was there for 10 years.
10 years. So was there a connection? Did you have a passion for education, or, you went to Vanderbilt, I went to Duke, so we're probably both a little bit overeducated in some ways.
Yeah.
But was there an education draw, or was it the serving in an underserved area? And why education? What was the pull there?
So at the time, I probably didn't realize the pull that I had deep in my heart to education. But during the course of my years there, it was really revealed to me that the importance of education was instilled in me as a child by my father. I grew up in a really small town in Arkansas. And I mean, when I say small, I mean really small. Like, there was not one traffic light, no fast food. When I was there, it was about 2,300 people in the whole town.
Oh, wow.
And my father had grown up there, and his father had grown up there, and my dad was a farmer. And so my dad knew that he was going to be living in that town, and he decided that he wanted his kids to go away to boarding school. And the reason behind that is that in his life, he went to the public schools that were in this little town, and he always would tell me, if it was possible to flunk the SAT, I did. And he, having gone all the way through high school in this little town, he felt like there was so much he didn't know, and he got some guidance from a family member who lived in the big city, lived in Little Rock, that he needed to go away and go to boarding school. And so my father, at, I guess 18 years old, applied at his uncle's direction. He applied to Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire. And for some reason, they accepted him. And he went for a post-grad senior year. So he'd already finished high school and he did his senior year over. He got on a train in Augusta, Arkansas, and rode to New Hampshire, never having seen the campus, nothing. And my father passed away last year, so this is really fresh in my mind, because when I spoke at his funeral, I talked about the value of education that he had taught me. And he literally got there, and I think I could sum it up that he spent a year being completely humiliated by what he didn't know. He was humiliated by the way he talked, his accent. He always talked about being in physics class, and they told him to use a slide rule, and he didn't even know what a slide rule was. I don't either, by the way, but I missed that chapter. But he was humiliated, and so he determined that when he saw what all was out there in the world, that he knew his kids would be raised in that town, and that we were going to go away to school. And so he always said he only had 2 kids because he couldn't afford to send more than 2 kids to boarding school and to college. And so my brother and I both went away to boarding school in the 9th grade. We did not go up north. We went a little closer. We were both in Virginia. I was at a girls' school, and my brother was at a boys' school. And really, once I got into a world at Atlanta Youth Academy where I was talking about educational opportunity every day, I all of a sudden had this realization of how the Lord had woven that value of educational opportunity in me as a really small child, and I kind of didn't even know it. But I was so passionate about what I was doing and helping kids from underserved areas of Atlanta. I just had this realization that, wow, I was basically kind of like that, because there was no educational opportunity right around where I grew up. So, at great personal sacrifice, financial sacrifice, my parents, sent us to boarding school, and then, really just opened the door to say, where do you want to go to college? And didn't put any restrictions on it. So I got it real young.
I love education as a philanthropic cause. There's this whole conversation for, 15 years ago, I think is when we could mark it, with the publication of When Helping Hurts and Toxic Charity in 2009. But obviously before then, there's been a conversation around creating dependency in philanthropy and in charity. So, charity has become a bad word. We like the word charity at Simple Charity. We think about charity as that old school theological virtue of love. And with love, there has to be wisdom, and there has to be these other virtues that come alongside that virtue of love. And at the same time, I love education as a cause, because it is not giving a handout, and it kind of eschews that whole dialogue. Like, education, especially for children, is simply giving people the opportunity to learn and to grow and to develop. And you're not even doing the work for the students. You're giving students the opportunity to do the work. And so as a cause, to me, it's one of those no-brainers that really eschews that whole When Helping Hurts conversation. If we increase access to education, to quality education for children, that makes those children's lives, it impacts their whole trajectory of their lives. There are studies that the economics literature is pretty developed. that I think I'm hearing your dog. Your dog's making a special appearance on our
Yes,
podcast,
yes,
which is
she's
wonderful.
greeting someone at the door. I'm so sorry.
That's great. No worries. Um, but there's studies in economics now that show, hey, this is a causal relationship. Education actually improves earnings, and it is education itself, not other factors. And it's not even the credentials. So it's not that once you graduate from high school, you can carry your high school diploma and that gives you a bump in your income 10, 20, 30 years down the line, although that is true. But it's actually going from 10th grade to 11th grade increases your income 10, 20, 30 years down the line. So it's actually a causal relationship of every year of education that we can provide to kids improves their life outcomes socioeconomically. And so to me, it's just one of the most powerful ways of alleviating poverty, of improving people's well-being and relationships even years down the line. I'm curious about in Atlanta, like education opportunities in Atlanta, the city of Atlanta, are not evenly distributed. So tell me more about Atlanta Youth Academy, and what case would you make to, when you had that job, to givers of, hey, this is a great investment for your philanthropic capital?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I'm going to refer to Atlanta Youth Academy as AYA because that's what a lot of people, it's easier to say, and that's how we're referred to a lot around Atlanta. So AYA was founded by a guy who had become a believer in his high school, college-ish type years. And he was really struck, and this was back in 1997, okay? So there was not a lot of conversation like there is today about equity in education. And he realized that the kind of education that was available to him growing up on kind of the north side of Atlanta, he had lots of options. And what he realized in doing some serving actually in the Techwood Homes area, which is no longer there, but it's kind of where Georgia Tech is, and it was a very, very rough area. And he realized that the kids they had no idea what educational opportunity even meant. They weren't even talking about going to college, and if they were, they didn't even know that the SAT was something they needed to take in order to be able to go to college. And so he was really struck by the inequity, and so he started the school basically with one teacher and 9 students who were in kindergarten, and it was in a church.
Wow. One teacher and 9 students.
Yeah, and they began to, they basically grew 1 grade at a time until they went all the way through 8th grade. The community, as he was trying to raise money, were just saying, you know what, this business model really doesn't work. A private school has to survive on tuition income, and that's not going to be a viable income source for you. And so he really just felt so called by the Lord to do this. The model was every family had to pay something to go there. So it wasn't a handout. And everybody would then, all the families had some skin in the game. So there was some sense of responsibility, because especially in the US, we hit that place of if it's free, it doesn't hold as much value to us. It creates a sense of entitlement, if you will. And so that was the model of the school. And the school raises, like, I want to say the percentage is 93%.
Yeah, it's on the website, 93%.
Yeah, 93% of the operating budget is raised in charitable donations. And what was really um, the most compelling case to me was just, you know, the kids there didn't choose what zip code they were born into or they
Right.
lived in. Um, and they deserved as much opportunity as someone who happened to be, born on another part of town.
Yeah.
Um,
I want to share just a little bit, dig into that reality of
mhm.
education. My understanding is education systems, schools are funded by property taxes, and so your zip code does directly influence the funding available for schools. And the zip code, I looked this up before this call, the zip code that Atlanta Youth Academy is located in, the median household income in 2023 is $42,383. So each household, 42,000. The median individual income is $27,095. So the idea of living in downtown Atlanta as an individual on $27,095 or less, um, for people from different parts of the city, that is kind of unfathomable. And what's really interesting about Atlanta, and I'm digging in here a little bit, Aaron, because I just moved back to Atlanta. I have a job in philanthropy, and I want to learn my city. I grew
Yeah.
up here. I grew up in the north part of, in Cumming. It's, cozy. It's just super cozy, and people hang out in Lakeland near, and the schools are good. But the thing about this city that we call home is that the different parts of the city are like totally different worlds, and there's not much interaction. So just northwest in the Vining Smyrna area, median household income $170,000. So Vining Smyrna,
Yeah.
$170,000 in median income. So half people make that or more. And gosh, 20 miles southeast, where Atlanta Youth Academy is
Yeah.
located,
Yeah. It's
median
very
income.
stunning.
It's
The
stunning. It's a
Yeah.
quarter. It's a quarter of that, and so there's this proximity, but there's not this proximity, and I think that's really important. I think uh, like my challenge for Christians. There's a lot of Christians in Atlanta. My challenge for Christians is when you're thinking about your local impact, like get out of Cumming and Alpharetta, and
Amen.
look at our city. Like go look at the city as a whole. Like look at Clarkston and look at refugees who are in Clarkston. Look at the south part of Atlanta and look at the education disparities just from the north part of the city to the south part of the city. And I think we need to reimagine in our churches even the way we think about local impact in Atlanta. It's not, don't just focus on the people in Buckhead. And there's people struggling in all places. But
Yes.
we are missing the forest for the trees when we, in our churches, talk about having a local impact and we don't go south where the median income is a quarter of what it is in peer groups in the north part of the city.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
No, I agree with you. And you know, I there's a lot in education in Atlanta that is broken. Um, I really do believe that the model that AYA uses, and there are a few other schools around that are in the Atlanta metro area that are somewhat similar. Nobody's doing it exactly the same because there are a couple that don't have the faith component. There are there are just a couple of different models, but really the focus at AYA is really on how far can we get these children to go, and
Right.
the statistics are pretty amazing in that 100% of the kids, it only goes through 8th grade, but 100% of the kids have gone on to graduate from high school who have graduated 8th grade at Atlanta Youth academy, and then
Oh my
it's in the
goodness.
90% that
I
have
mean,
gone
that's
to
higher
college.
than, that's higher than Forsyth County's school system. I mean, obviously.
Oh yeah,
100% is as high as you can go.
yeah. Well, and it is a very small student community. I know that they're working to grow it some, but it takes a lot of money. But so it's only up until now. There's only been one section of 15 in each grade. Going through. So it's not a lot of kids, but the kids, once they get into the 8th grade and they get a lot of really wise counsel to help them choose where they're going to go to high school. And people used to ask me all the time if AYA was going to add a high school, and the answer was no, because the founder and the board really felt like it was a great little cocoon for elementary and junior high, and then but it was a really small pond, so you could be a big fish in a little pond. And if you were to jump from that to a college environment, that's a huge change. So if you came to AYA for those years,
Right.
the 10 primary years, pre-K up through 8th grade, and then you went to another school, about 50% of the kids that finished in the 8th grade went on to an independent school. So, some of the schools that everybody knows in Atlanta would offer scholarships to the kids, if they qualified, obviously, um, so that they could then go to a good school. Some of them went to charter schools, a few went back to their public school, but they really try to help the kids so that they stay on a trajectory that is going to hopefully get them to college. And that's unique, where they would get that amount of personal attention toward what their future could look like.
Mm. Let's talk some about Edify and your work now with Edify, and then I am curious to circle back and seeing what's it like to fundraise for local Christ-centered education in underserved communities, and then what's it like to fundraise in global education and Christ-centered education in underserved communities. Tripping over words there.
Yes.
But Edify's model, maybe you could give us a quick overview. Edify, how many countries you work in, or a couple of the distinctive components of Edify's programs.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what Edify does basically, and these are my words. This is not like verbatim the mission statement, but we basically come alongside little AYAs, so little Christ-centered schools for low-income kids, but we do it on a global scale. We're currently in 8 countries in Africa and 7 countries in Latin America. And so, when Edify approached me to come be in a development role there, I wasn't really looking, but it was very interesting to me, having been to Africa back in 2008 and having seen some schools that were basically a cinder block building with cutouts in the walls for windows but no glass, and dirt on the floor, and some really adorable, very happy children in uniforms. Having the contrast in my head of that compared to a very well-resourced school of that type in Atlanta really seared my heart with the need to be able to, for the schools that are in the developing world, to really have better resources and have better access to do what they do with excellence, and to also be financially sustainable. So we are in 4 countries in East Africa: Rwanda, Uganda, Ethiopia, and Kenya. We just opened Kenya.
Recently in Kenya, yes. Very
Pardon me?
exciting.
Yeah, we just opened in Kenya in the last 2 months, and then in West
I'm rocking my
Africa.
my Kenya bracelet. I've spent um, about 5 months there when I was in college.
Oh, awesome, awesome. Africa really gets in your blood, I think, and in your heart. Because I'm just I loved it when I was there. Um, and in West Africa, we're in Ghana, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Burkina Faso. With we're laying the groundwork as we speak to open in Nigeria in the next probably 3 months. Um, and then in Latin America, we're in 7 countries there. Um, so what we do is almost like a consultant. We
Right.
come alongside them and provide training. We provide access to loan capital, and we provide access and training in educational technology. So there's basically just 3 things that Edify does. But oftentimes, Brian, when we come in to work with a school, often it's helping them in the financial um, part of what they do,
Hmm.
because they often don't know how to run the school like a business.
Right.
Often it can be a pastor who started a school because the schools in his area of town or his village either didn't exist, or they were not good, or they were corrupt. Sometimes it's a school teacher, a retired school teacher. Sometimes it's just a family who realized there wasn't a good option for their own children, and they have gotten in because they felt called to start a school, but they really don't have the training to know what they're doing. And so we can help them from something as simple as QuickBooks, helping them, access QuickBooks, learn about QuickBooks, learn how to use it. Um, and then we really want them to be equipped so that they can have access to capital, but it not be a handout from, the US or another country with greater resources, but that we help them in the financial management so that they can run the school in the black, figure
Yep.
out where they need help. If they're not collecting the fees that they need to be, sometimes it's because they just haven't kept good records. Sometimes we help them identify new income sources where they can, rent their facilities on the weekends. Or we have one school proprietor that I've happened to meet who bought water purification equipment, and she began to sell purified water to the people in the town as another
As a
income stream. So we want
revenue
them
generating
to
for
be
the school.
financially sustainable without relying on handouts from the US or other countries.
So
Um,
one of the things that I've heard as a question raised about Edify's work that I think is a really important question to unpack is why is the governments not doing this? And as in, why are the governments of these countries in Africa not educating their own populations? And I think there's a couple answers there, and I'm curious to hear how you would respond to that question. I did want to share, just to kind of paint the picture, some of the global landscape for people who maybe haven't traveled in Africa before, aren't familiar with how education works in other countries. Private providers of education are where people go. Everyone wants to be in a private school in sub-Saharan Africa. That's maybe a slight exaggeration, but not much. So 20% of enrolled students in sub-Saharan Africa are in private schools. So that's more than twice the percentage in the U.S. So that's interesting, and still, sub-Saharan Africa has the highest rate of children who are out of school in the world. So about a fifth of primary school. This is data from the World Bank. A fifth of primary school children are not in school. So the government is not doing this. Basically, community members step up as educational entrepreneurs, is what we can call them, and they start schools. And to your point, you travel much, travel any in Africa and start talking to people. It's like every like hardworking, educated person who starts to give back to their community. It's like, what do? You either start a school or you start an orphanage, because one of the things that's true about Africa too is its demographics. It's just a lot of children.
Yes.
And so this kind of question of how do we care for all of these children, and so a lot of socially conscious people start schools and start orphanages. But why? What would your response be to why the government's not doing this?
That's a really good question, Brian. What I have learned, because all the countries have some sort of government schools. There's a Ministry of Education in all the countries, but unfortunately, the schools are extremely overcrowded. In Africa, you don't have to have a teaching certificate to teach. There has been a big problem with the, the work ethic, perhaps, of the people working in the schools, where they just, don't show up to
Right.
teach one day. And I think also there is, as there is in all of the developing world, not just in the education dimension, but there's a lot of corruption.
Yep.
And the as you said, the people who have sort of an entrepreneurial spirit are stepping up to fill the void.
Right. I absolutely agree. I mean, I think if I were to put one word on it, it's government corruption. And there was a time in my life when I thought it was wrong for like Americans to look at Africa and just be like, your problems are your fault, it's your government's fault. But then I spent time in Kenya and I met some extraordinary people who were believers, who were hard workers, entrepreneurial. They had spent some time with a couple who had started a primary school and a children's home, which again, that's kind of what you do when you get to, if you're successful in Kenya.
Amen.
And you're in that stage in life, and these are Kenyan people, by the way, but they would say the problem is corruption. They would say, and that's the thing, is you start talking to kind of the African middle class, and there's a lot of complaints about corruption because and you look at the data, and a lot of money that is earmarked for educational expenses does not make it down.
That's right.
And so it's kind of the private sector filling the gap. And so I think for us as believers, we have this opportunity to really come alongside those local leaders and entrepreneurs. And this is something I love about Edify, is Edify is accompanying those local leaders and entrepreneurs who have started schools to serve their own community, to serve the vulnerable in their own community. And it's helping them, equipping them with technology, with training, with access to loan capital to continue the work. It's the same thing, is it's giving even those people an opportunity. It's not creating dependency, it's giving them the opportunity to make an impact in their communities.
Absolutely. And the structure in Edify's model of how we work with the schools, and then we begin to really we intensify with certain schools. Some schools will just get a couple of trainings here and there, but as they progress with us, we really get much more involved, and the goal is to help the schools achieve a level of competency and excellence at what they're doing, and then basically based on the scripture that to whom much is given, much is expected, we want them to then come alongside the peers in their communities to help them. so that, ultimately Edify would like to work ourselves out of a job, that we really make so much impact on the schools that we work with that they begin to help each other and they network with each other, so that it's a very, well-run educational machine of a lot of independent schools, but that they help each other. And when Edify was founded, the two gentlemen who founded it, the conversations that they were having that led them to feel called to do this were around, how can we really change nations? How can we really affect lasting change for God's kingdom around the globe? And the conclusion was education, as we've been talking about on this whole call, education, so that there is economic opportunity. But if you do it in the absence of the gospel, then you are very susceptible to that corruption problem that we've been talking about. That really bringing Jesus and the character that's going to be built by following Jesus and loving people like Jesus and wanting to live our lives to look like Jesus, that's what's going to make the difference in combating the corruption. Because if we can start with little children and build them up where they're loved and they know Jesus, and that's their framework and their worldview, they're going to be able to be the leaders of the future that, will hopefully won't fall into the trap of the corruption of some of the people that, have been in power in today's world.
Love that vision, Aaron, and I agree. I think it is one of the, when I think of Edify, I think of leverage. And you can never quantify impact perfectly, but you can quantify impact to some extent. But one of the interesting things about what you just said is there's actually some empirical social science supporting what you just said in the book, The Bottom Billion by Paul Collier. I remember there is a study on what predicts a overthrow of a corrupt government and the implementation of democracy. So basically, some economists looked at a bunch of countries, looked at kind of these democratic revolutions, and one of the things that predicted these democratic revolutions was the percentage of girls who received education in the years prior to that. So essentially, if you educate girls, because globally, a lot of times, if someone's going to be excluded from education opportunities, it is girls more than boys. Yep. But if you educate those girls, you're strengthening the democracy of that country for decades to come, because now you have this political bloc that can think for themselves, that have this sense of self-efficacy and agency, and that want to hold their elected officials or their government officials, if they're not elected, accountable. And so,
Amen.
So and there's a science behind this, so it's a great bet, and you can't quite quantify that. Like, I can't say, give Edify $1 million and we'll have democracy in Somalia, like 20 years from now or something. You guys aren't even working together, but you can't quantify that. But one of the things that Edify does is provide impact metrics. And I was wondering if what is the typical cost of impacting one student's life by giving to Edify?
It's $1.76. $1.76 per child impacted in the
so if you
in the 2024 fiscal year.
That's awesome. So if you're a foundation listening to this, if you're someone with some funds in a donor advised fund or a charitable trust or an estate plan, and you want to impact 1,000 students around the world, give Aaron a call. And to me, that feels like a great investment to impact the lives of 1,000 students.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it has been, you know, you asked me earlier, and I'm not sure if you're ready to go there, but about the difference in raising money, you know, with the global versus the local. And what has been stunning to me is how far a dollar can go when you're talking, you know, doing work and serving in the developing world. Um, you know, Atlanta Youth Academy is doing an amazing job in the U.S. And the budget's like $4.2 million, I think, for 1 year. And that's for, you know, a little bit less than 200 kids, 170 kids. And that's just the price of doing business in the U.S. They're doing a good job. It's well stewarded, but it is really expensive. And fundraising for that in the space in Atlanta is, it's very compelling. As you were challenging people to think about, where do you need to focus in your city? It's really important that we focus on our city and that we have
Right.
places like AYA and that they have the money that they need. And it's not a hard sell. If you just go to the campus and you feel the presence of the spirit of the school, you generally, nobody that I took on a tour of the school really ever kind of was like, yeah, it's okay. Everybody was very taken with how well it was working, how well mannered the kids were, how the loving spirit just pervaded it. The kids were poised and would shake your hand and look you in the eye, and they just were absolutely getting a very well-rounded education.
Right. And again, in the poorest zip code in Atlanta.
Yeah, it's also, by the way, the highest drug conviction zip code in the city as well.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
But global cause, kind of the same cause. The global cause, $1.76 impacts a student's life. Amazing kind of reach for what's possible, the leverage that's available, and at the same time, in some ways, harder to fundraise for because you can't bring the donor into the school because it's across an ocean, because it's and so there's this I like that you said we should be invested locally. I think that's absolutely true. I think we should expand the aperture of that if you live in the North Metro Atlanta area and to include the South Metro Atlanta area. I also think that there is a phenomenal opportunity for philanthropic impact through global organizations like Edify.
Yeah, it really and the market of Christian schools is another thing that has been stunning to me. I had no idea how many Christian schools there are. But just as an example, in Uganda, we believe there are more than 47,000 low-fee Christian schools in that country alone. And we've been on the ground working in that country for 5 years, and we are working with more than 16,000 of the schools. That's our largest staff on the ground in any country. I think we have 23, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere around there, 23, 22, 24, something like that. Folks on the ground in Uganda. But we're not even halfway to meeting the demand.
Right. Yeah, that's
and we're growing as fast as we can, but we want to be really, really careful to not get ahead of our skis and to make sure that we don't compromise the quality in order to reach the quantity of demand. And we also want to make sure that we stay true to who we are. We stay true to our mission, and that we hire folks that are, that are believers, that absolutely are in sync with our mission and what we want to do and our core values as an organization. So we hire very, very, very carefully. And we're being, I think, amazingly intentional and diligent in the stewardship of the money that's given to us, as to fuel the growing budget and fuel the growing demand.
Erin, thank you for all that you do to support the global work of Edify. Thank you for holding the banner here in Atlanta. I think you're the first kind of development person in the Atlanta area. And so if you're listening to this and you're from the Atlanta area, especially want to connect with Erin to learn more about Edify, I really encourage you to reach out. Is that okay, Erin? I just give a blanket invitation.
I love it.
And then certainly, if you have major philanthropic capacity, again, through a foundation, donor-advised fund, something like that, and you're interested in considering Edify for a larger gift, certainly connect with Erin to just learn more and start a conversation and to go deeper in that. There's a lot of philanthropic capital in this country, and so we talk about that a lot at Simple Charity, and I think Edify is one of those kind of blue chip, great bang for your buck. You're going to the model works, the theory is there, the execution is there, the excellence and the institution from the U.S. side to the global side is all there. And so it's just like a safe bet solving a massive challenge, millions and millions of kids who are not in school. To your point, even Uganda, y'all have amazing market penetration, and it's 25% of the market.
Right. Right.
So anyways, there's more work to be done in this. This podcast is about learning to love like Jesus. And at Simple Charity, we talk about loving like Jesus through giving, through service, and through prayer. But as we're thinking about education and supporting education, what are you learning about Jesus? And why do you think that Jesus is a fan of the work of Edify, of Atlanta Youth Academy? Why does Jesus care, assuming Jesus cares? I think he does, about education for underserved communities.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question in my mind Jesus cares, and that he has been guiding individuals, in his providential plan to help touch the lives, because ultimately we want everyone to come to a saving knowledge of Jesus. And so a school can be the conduit to that. And it can also be the conduit not only for the children, but for their families and then their communities. So I think that, particularly when I'm talking about Edify, the thing that hit me between the eyes, honestly, when I was looking at the potential of coming to work for this ministry and evaluating it, I really didn't think too much about what was happening on the other side of the world. I was really focused on my city, and that's not wrong. That's a good thing. But I was really hit between the eyes by the Great Commission. We are called to make disciples of all nations. And ultimately, education is just another means of making disciples, and making disciples who can be leaders and who can really make a difference everywhere around them, from their immediate family to the people that live near them in their little neighborhood, to their whole community, to their country. I think that Jesus absolutely cares about, how his children all around the world learn to love each other, learn to love him. And sometimes the learning that's academic is what is going to enable them to really love their community for him, because they're going to do it through the things that they learn in a classroom.
Amen. Well, thank you, Erin. Any final thoughts that you want to share about Edify or loving like Jesus through supporting Christ-centered education?
No, I just would I would encourage anyone who hasn't jumped in to jump in. It has been so fulfilling and exciting to me to learn about what God is doing around the world, because he's up to a lot. And sometimes it feels like he's up to more in other countries besides the U.S., because there is such a hunger that we see every single day in these developing world countries. They're hungry for Jesus. They're hungry to be loved. They're hungry for education. They want the help because they want to get better, and that has been really refreshing and eye-opening to me, and it's something I had never really thought about and never focused on. I think that God wants to show us more about who he is and more about what he is doing in this world, and he can do that through our involvement at a school like an AYA, right here in our hometown. And he can really blow the doors off of your mind when you're talking these other countries and cultures that are out there. And, yes, they have to face material poverty on a daily basis. And that is what we want to do, is help eradicate that material poverty. But what they can teach us about spiritual poverty and the spiritual wealth that they have, that we in the U.S. don't necessarily even scratch the surface of, is really, it'll change your life.
You can learn more about Atlanta Youth Academy at atlantayouthacademy.com. And you can learn more about Edify's work at edify.org. That's edify.org. The invitation to grow this week, as the school year is starting back up, is to pray for students near and far. Would you take a moment to do that with me now? I especially encourage you to pray for students who have to overcome trauma or poverty or injustice as they pursue learning and opportunities for their future. Thank you to Michael Hansen for editing this episode, Grace Sukach for the podcast artwork, and of course to Erin Conrad for sharing your story. If you have feedback on this episode, reach out to me at brian@simplecherry.org. And the next time that we're together, I will interview a husband and wife duo who have been a source of inspiration and encouragement to me for over a decade now through their work to bring clean water and hope to a rural community in southern Kenya. Please join me in that conversation as we continue to learn to love generously like Jesus. And if this podcast has been helpful for you, it would be hugely helpful for us if you could take a moment to rate and review, give the algorithm some love on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.